Zara, a black woman, is kicked out of the airport by staff after a simple misunderstanding. But when her father arrives, everything changes. The airport staff realize too late that they've made a huge mistake, and now they have to face the consequences. What happens next will shock you. What's so special about Zara's father? Keep watching to find out. Before we continue, comment below and tell us where you're watching from. The airport staff have no idea what's coming. Zara's father holds more power than they could have ever imagined. Zara had always been confident, independent, and determined to make her mark in the world. As a black woman traveling for a career opportunity, she knew she had to work harder than most, but she was used to facing challenges head-on. Zara was always respectful, keeping to herself and never drawing attention. But this time, something was different. Sarah, the head airport security agent, was a no-nonsense type of person. She prided herself on following the rules to the letter. When Zara arrived late to her gate, Sarah assumed the worst. Zara's calm demeanor seemed like an attempt to avoid the situation, and Sarah wasn't having it. She didn't know Zara's story, nor did she care. In her eyes, Zara was just another troublemaker. The airport was bustling as usual, people rushing through security, rushing to catch flights. But little did they know, this day would turn into something much more than a simple travel experience. Zara's heart pounded in her chest as she rushed through the airport. She had a big meeting to attend, and her flight was already boarding. As she made her way to security, she accidentally bumped into a luggage cart that had been left in the way. It was a small mistake, one that could happen to anyone. But as soon as it happened, she noticed the sharp glare from Sarah, the head security agent. "Excuse me, can you not watch where you're going?" Sarah snapped, her voice laced with irritation. Zara froze for a moment. It wasn't as if she had caused a massive disruption. She was just trying to make it through security as quickly as possible. But Sarah wasn't having it. "You're making a mess. Get it together," she said sharply, her eyes narrowing. Zara tried to explain herself. "I'm really sorry. I'm just running late for my flight. It wasn't intentional." But Sarah wasn't listening. Instead, she raised her voice even more, signaling for one of her colleagues to come over. "I'm not tolerating this. You're causing a scene. You need to leave the terminal." Zara's stomach dropped. She couldn't believe what was happening. She had been polite, apologetic, and calm. But now, she was being told to leave the airport for something that wasn't even her fault. The other passengers around her started to notice the confrontation, whispering among themselves. Some seemed uncomfortable, but none of them spoke up. Zara felt exposed and humiliated, but she held her ground. "Please, I just need to catch my flight. I've done nothing wrong." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You're wasting my time, and I'm not going to let you make a scene here. I said leave." She pointed toward the exit, her tone final. Zara didn't want to escalate things, but she couldn't just back down. She tried to remain calm, hoping for some kind of understanding. "You don't have to kick me out like this. It was a mistake," Zara repeated, her voice now trembling with frustration. The frustration boiled up inside of her. She had been polite, trying to avoid confrontation. But Sarah was relentless. Zara's mind raced. Why was she being treated like this? Was it because of how she looked? Was she being unfairly judged? Zara felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her. She had never been treated like this before, especially not in such a public place. The sting of racial bias was something she had faced before in small, quiet ways, but this was different. This was out in the open, and there was no one there to defend her. Still, she held her ground. "I don't deserve this. I'm not leaving. I'm just trying to catch my flight," Zara said, her voice steady now, but the anger was building. She wasn't going to let this woman, or anyone, push her around like this. But Sarah wasn't having any of it. She gestured to the exit again. "I've given you a chance. Now go before I get security involved." Zara's frustration reached a peak. She couldn't stand there any longer being treated like she didn't belong. But just as she turned to leave the security checkpoint, she saw a familiar face across the terminal. Zara's father. Her heart skipped a beat. He wasn't supposed to be here, but the moment she saw him, she felt a sense of calm flood over her. She quickly grabbed her phone and called him. "Dad, I need you here, right now. There's a problem." Her father's voice was calm but firm on the other end of the line. "Stay right there, Zara. I'm on my way." She hung up, but Sarah hadn't noticed. She was still insisting that Zara leave the terminal. Zara tried to stay composed, but she couldn't shake the feeling of injustice. What was happening felt so wrong. Minutes later, Zara's father walked into the terminal, and everything seemed to stop. The airport staff, busy with their usual routines, suddenly froze as they noticed him. Zara's father wasn't just any person. He was a well-known businessman with connections that stretched far beyond the airport. He had the kind of power that most people couldn't even imagine. The moment Zara's father stepped forward, Sarah immediately tensed up. She had no idea who he was or why he was there, but her body language shifted. Zara's father walked straight. Toward her, his steps purposeful. Zara stood silently, watching as the scene she never expected unfolded before her eyes. What had started as a small misunderstanding had now turned into something bigger than she could have ever imagined. Zara's heart pounded as she realized the staff had no idea what was coming next. Zara's father walked toward the staff with an air of authority that immediately changed the atmosphere. Sarah, still unsure of what was happening, paused, her eyes widening slightly. She had no idea who this man was, but there was something in the way he carried himself that made her uncomfortable. The other staff members who had been going about their work now watched with bated breath, unsure of what to expect. Zara's father didn't waste time. He looked straight at Sarah and, in a calm but firm voice, said, "I need to speak to the person in charge of this situation." His voice was low and steady, but there was no mistaking the power in his words. Sarah hesitated for a moment before she signaled for the airport manager to come over. She still didn't understand what was going on, but there was an unsettling feeling in the air. Zara's father didn't introduce himself yet. He was waiting. The tension in the airport seemed to stretch on forever as Zara stood silently, watching the scene unfold before her. When the airport manager arrived, Zara's father turned to him. "I believe there's been a mistake," he began, his tone still calm but laced with authority. "My daughter was unjustly treated by your staff, and I'd like to know why." The manager, visibly taken aback by the situation, looked at Sarah for an explanation. But Sarah wasn't prepared for this. She stammered, unsure of how to respond, her earlier confidence crumbling in the face of this unexpected confrontation. The manager, sensing the shift in power, quickly turned his attention to Zara's father, his expression now one of concern rather than authority. "Sir, I apologize for the misunderstanding," the manager said, trying to regain control of the situation. "We will look into this immediately. We never meant to cause you or your daughter any distress." Zara's father shook his head slightly, his gaze never leaving the manager's face. "No, you didn't just cause distress. You humiliated my daughter for something that wasn't her fault. And now you're trying to brush it under the rug. That's not good enough." Zara's heart raced. She had never seen her father so firm, so unwavering. In the past, he had always been calm and composed, but now his words carried the weight of someone who had built his reputation on fairness and justice. She had always admired her father's quiet strength, but now, standing next to him, she saw just how powerful it could be when someone used that strength to fight for what was right. The manager quickly nodded. "We'll make sure this doesn't happen again. I'll personally ensure that this is dealt with." But Zara's father wasn't done. He turned to Sarah, who had remained silent, still reeling from the realization of who Zara's father was. "And as for you," he said, his voice cold, "I hope you take this as a lesson. You can't treat people like this no matter who they are or what they look like. Your actions reflect on this airport, and it's clear you need more training in how to handle situations like this." Sarah, her face flushed with embarrassment, could barely meet his gaze. The reality of her mistake had hit her hard. She had let her assumptions cloud her judgment, and now she was paying the price. She muttered an apology, but it felt hollow, unconvincing. Zara's father nodded, satisfied that at least part of the situation was being addressed. "I expect a full investigation into this matter and proper training for your staff," he said, his voice still steady. "If you can't handle a situation like this without resorting to discrimination, then perhaps you need a reminder of how to properly treat all passengers." The airport manager quickly agreed, promising that the situation would be reviewed, and Zara's father's concerns would be taken seriously. As Zara's father turned to leave, the staff quietly stepped aside, no longer looking at her with judgment. The power had shifted, and Zara felt a sense of relief wash over her. The nightmare was finally over. Zara, still processing everything that had happened, turned to her father. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Her father smiled at her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to thank me, Zara. You did the right thing by standing up for yourself. And now, we make sure this never happens again." As they walked out of the airport together, Zara realized that this experience had changed her. She wasn't just the quiet girl who tried to avoid conflict. She was someone who could stand up for herself and others, someone who could use her voice to make sure injustice didn't go unchecked. And for the first time, she felt like she truly belonged in the world, not as a passive bystander, but as an active force for change. As Zara and her father walked out of the airport, a sense of calm finally settled over her. The nightmare she had endured for the last few hours seemed like it was over, but there was still something in the air, a feeling of unease, like the dust had yet to settle. It wasn't until they reached the parking lot and Zara's father checked his phone that things truly took a turn. A notification popped up on his screen. A news outlet had picked up the story of the altercation at the airport. Zara's eyes widened as she read the headline aloud. "Airport staff kicks out black woman. Regrets everything when her powerful father arrives." She turned to her father in surprise. How did they find out so quickly? Her father didn't answer immediately, his face tense as he scrolled through the article. The piece mentioned not just the incident, but also highlighted Zara's father's influential role in the business world and his history of advocating for equality. It turned out that the moment he arrived at the airport, his name and face were immediately recognized by a reporter who had been in the terminal at the time. The revelation hit Zara hard. She had known her father was successful, but she had never thought of him as someone who could change the course of events simply by showing up. She was still processing everything that had happened when her father spoke. "It's not just about the mistake they made with you, Zara," he said, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "It's about what happens next. This story is bigger than the airport staff now." Zara's confusion only deepened. "What do you mean? How is it bigger? It's just one mistake." Her father looked at her with a glint of pride in his eyes. "Zara, this isn't just about you or me. It's about everyone who's ever been treated unfairly because of who they are or how they look. When a story like this gets out, it shows how deep the issues really run. It doesn't just affect the airport. It affects everyone who faces discrimination every single day." The weight of her father's words started to sink in, and for the first time, Zara realized the power of their influence. Her father had never been one to flaunt his status, but the situation at the airport had uncovered just how much his name could shift the balance of power. This wasn't just a one-off incident, it was a wake-up call to everyone involved. As they walked to the car, Zara's father continued. "You see, Zara, sometimes the world doesn't change until people start to see the truth. And today, people are seeing the truth. People are starting to realize that how you're treated isn't just about individual actions. It's about the systems in place that let those actions happen in the first place. Zara nodded, feeling a growing sense of responsibility. Her father was right. The incident at the airport wasn't just about her. It was about starting a larger conversation. It was about calling out unfair treatment and shining a light on the things that were usually ignored or swept under the rug. By the time they reached their car, Zara's phone was buzzing non-stop. Messages were flooding in. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers had seen the news story. Some offered support, while others expressed shock at how easily Zara had been dismissed by the airport staff. She felt the weight of it all. But this time. It didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a call to action. Her father continued, "Now, we're going to make sure this doesn't end here. We're going to use this as a platform to push for real change. We'll speak up for the people who can't speak for themselves. And you, Zara, will be part of that change. You've got the power to be a voice, even when it's uncomfortable." Zara stared out of the window, letting the magnitude of her father's words sink in. She had always been quiet, always avoided conflict, but now she understood that her silence was no longer an option. The world had opened her eyes to the reality of what was going on behind the scenes, and her father's presence had shown her how powerful one person's voice could be. By the time they reached home, Zara had made up her mind. She wasn't just going to let this moment pass. She was going to take action, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been mistreated in silence. The story that had started as a small personal conflict at an airport had now become something much bigger. It wasn't just about one girl being unfairly kicked out. It was about an entire system of injustice that needed to be exposed. And Zara, with the support of her father, was going to be at the forefront of this change. The twist wasn't just the revelation of her father's influence. It was the awakening of Zara herself. She realized that power wasn't something you waited for. It was something you took, and she was ready to take it. The following days after the airport incident were a blur for Zara. Her phone never stopped buzzing. Messages, calls, news articles, all discussing what had happened. But, as the noise settled, Zara took a moment to reflect. Her father had not only stood up for her, but had also turned the situation into something far bigger than just an airport mistake. It was about fairness, about being treated with dignity, no matter who you were or what you looked like. Zara had never realized just how much power her father held until now. But beyond his influence and status, what stood out to her the most was his unwavering sense of justice. It was clear that his success wasn't just about making money. It was about making the world a better place, ensuring everyone had an equal opportunity to be heard. And now it was her turn to step into that role, to carry forward that responsibility. She spent hours reflecting on what had happened and how it had changed her. What began as a personal attack on her dignity had turned into an awakening. It wasn't just her father's power that had made a difference. It was the power of standing up for what's right. She realized that standing silent in the face of injustice didn't make her stronger. It made her complicit. This realization hit her hard. Her thoughts were interrupted by a call from the airport manager. "Miss Thomas, I wanted to personally apologize again for the incident with our staff," the manager began. "We've completed our investigation, and Sarah has been given additional sensitivity training. We've also implemented new guidelines to ensure that something like this never happens again." Zara nodded, though she wasn't sure what to say. She appreciated the apology, but it didn't feel like enough. She had witnessed firsthand how easily people could be dismissed simply because of their appearance. A small mistake had spiraled into a larger issue, and while training was a step in the right direction, Zara knew it was only the beginning. It wasn't just the staff who needed change. It was the system that allowed their biases to flourish unchecked. But despite these feelings, Zara wasn't angry. She wasn't filled with rage. Instead, she felt a sense of duty, of purpose, like the world had shown her something she had been blind to before. This wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had been discriminated against, overlooked, or dismissed. Her father had taught her that real change came not from avoiding conflict but from confronting it head-on. It wasn't always about winning. It was about ensuring that everyone's voice was heard. She could feel herself growing into a person she had always admired, someone who wasn't afraid to stand up for others, even when the odds were against them. A few weeks later, Zara decided to take her newfound sense of responsibility a step further. She began speaking out on social media, sharing her story and encouraging others to do the same. She partnered with local organizations to host workshops about the importance of equality in everyday life. Zara's message was simple but powerful. No one should ever be judged based on their appearance or background. Her words resonated with people, and soon others began sharing their own experiences of being unfairly treated. Zara had sparked something much bigger than she had ever imagined, a movement of people willing to stand up and demand justice for all. What started as a personal confrontation at an airport had transformed into a rallying cry for change. Zara's father watched with pride as his daughter began to use her platform to make a difference. He had always known that she had it in her, but now he saw that she was ready to take on the world, not with anger, but with purpose. Zara wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been dismissed or underestimated. She had taken what had once been a humiliating experience and turned it into a moment of empowerment for herself and others. As she continued her work, Zara realized that the real victory wasn't in the apology from the airport or the disciplinary actions taken against the staff. The true victory was in the change she had inspired, in herself, in the system, and in the people who joined her cause. Zara's father had shown her the importance of standing up for what was right. But now, Zara had shown the world that standing up was just the first step. The real work was in the conversations that followed, in the changes that happened, and in the hope that everyone's voice, no matter their background, would be heard. Zara's story became more than just an isolated incident. It became a symbol of change. She turned the unfair treatment she had faced at the airport into a powerful message about equality and respect. It wasn't just about what had happened to her. It was about ensuring no one else would ever face the same injustice. With her father's support, Zara became a voice for others who felt overlooked, mistreated, or underestimated. She shared her story far and wide, and soon others began speaking up too. What started as a single moment of humiliation became a movement of empowerment, where people stood together, demanding fairness for all. Zara's message was clear. We all deserve respect, no matter where we come from or how we look. It's up to each of us to speak out against injustice, no matter how small it may seem. Her story reminded people that standing up for yourself is never easy, but it's always worth it. Have you ever faced unfair treatment because of who you are? How did you handle it? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation and keep pushing for the respect and equality everyone deserves. And if you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that need to be heard.